straight into this discussion with a question for Chief Kais.
Sure.
How do you, as a police chief and community leader promoting this immigrant inclusion and refugee welcome, fight that perception on the ground that immigrants bring more crime to the communities into which they move, given the challenges of crime in cities like Chelsea?
Well, to be honest with you, Denzel, I guess I'm kind of lucky here in the city of Chelsea. That negative perception that may be taking place in some circles around the country. Luckily for me here in Chelsea, I don't really see that. I mean, the city of Chelsea has always been a melting pot for immigrants. Everyone's basically pulling in the right direction. Certainly, we have a city of approximately 70% Latino, of which many of the individuals are from Central America, mainly El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. But we have incredible partners in our city. We have great welcoming organizations. When a lot of immigrants get here from other countries, their first stop is usually the Mass General Hospital. They work in conjunction with the Chelsea Public Schools. We have community-based organizations like the Chelsea Collaborative, ROCA, the neighborhood developers. So basically, our collective mission is really to get people acclimated to the American culture and all the specific programming structure that we have here in the Commonwealth. So it's all been working in a very positive manner.
But I'm sure Zara and Alex, in your interactions with the media, with town halls, town panels, with the community, I'm sure that you've encountered problems in translating your data, the truth, the facts, to these audiences where it just does not appear real to them.
Not for me to talk because every word's unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the biggest challenges. And Dr. Pinot explained how humans really don't understand risk very well. So one of the things I try to do is try to figure out how to do that well. When I talk about your annual chance of being murdered in a terrorist attack of 1 in 3.6 million per year, I'm trying to find the best way to say that. That's the best I've come up with so far. But it's hard to make a comparison that people think is both serious enough, but also can be understood. Like, I don't want to compare it to being struck by lightning, because I think there is a big difference, and people feel there's a difference between being murdered by somebody and being struck by lightning, even though they're both rare occurrences. But talking about these rare events in a way that people can understand is vital to getting through to people.
I was just I agree with what Alex is saying, is that the statistics don't always convince people. Everyone has their own set of statistics. Everyone wants to pick apart everyone else's statistics. And so the thing I would add here is that the stories of immigrants, not as immigrants, but as fellow Americans who share the same values, we find go a long way. So I'm from Pakistan. My neighbor is from China. Our neighbor, has ancestors that came in on the Mayflower. We're all really concerned about housing prices in Silicon Valley. That's not an immigrant story. That's not, hey, our values versus theirs. It is literally our shared experience. And so in addition to the data, what we're seeing more and more is the need to share stories and perspectives that bring people together, and I think help those who are afraid of different people understand that we have many of the same concerns.
And these concerns are largely right now not just economic, but focused on terror and crime. And I showed that earlier on. So with an administration that's feeding into this kind of discussion, whether erroneously or not, first, Zara, I want you to give us a definition of sanctuary city, which has become a very loaded term. Now we're seeing trust city and safe city. And I want to get to Marissa as well, that if the data is showing that crime really isn't a problem when it comes to the foreign born, then how do you combat that perception where where it's just not true and yet people believe it? So how do you fight a perception versus a fact? Zara?
Sure. So, when you sent us the prep thoughts on the webinar, I was like, how exactly do we define a sanctuary city? Because in some ways it varies from city to city. There are often city and county fights about it. And then there's a question about who is actually protected in a sanctuary city. So I looked up the definition, and what I found, and I know I should never cite Wikipedia, but I will today for conciseness. A sanctuary city is a city that limits its cooperation with national government efforts to enforce immigration laws. In many cases, what that's going to mean is that local police are not cooperating with immigrations and customs enforcement. So if I get arrested for a DUI, if I get arrested in a fight, if I get arrested in any circumstance in a sanctuary city, I will be booked, fingerprinted, held, and then released. And there won't be any concern about my immigration status as it relates to the arrest. So that information won't be turned over. I mentioned that it's complicated because in cities where there is sanctuary, there are still questions about, well, are Black people safe from the police, right? So if we have a city that is not cooperating with ICE, but there are police killings of unarmed Black men and women, then what does sanctuary mean there? The rules around the way the FBI interacts with the American public have been so eroded over the last 17 years that when local police cooperate with the FBI, if they're subject to FBI standards, then that can be really dangerous for a community. I'm not going to call the police if I'm worried about them killing my Black relatives, if I'm worried about them deporting my undocumented relatives, or if I'm worried about them profiling my Arab and Muslim relatives. And so the law that we passed in Oakland, it's already a sanctuary city. We had to pass additional layers of protection to broaden who else gets covered.
But in this conversation, Marissa, you know that it's very easy to get into the good immigrant, bad immigrant discussion, and again, it's not founded in fact. It's not founded in the data. So how do you fight that perception? I mean, where do we start?
I mean, I think that some of the things that Zara talked about sanctuary cities, and actually the fact that, so I'll point to actually to a couple of people who've done a really good job using good data and I think a pragmatism value to talk about sanctuary cities and sort of counter this narrative of immigrants commit crime. So Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, and I've also heard Eric Garcetti, who's the mayor of Los Angeles, talk about the ways in which immigrant communities actually help fight crime, because when they have a trusting relationship with police, they're more likely to report problems and to cooperate, et cetera. So this is how we make things work in our cities, and that's why we need sanctuary cities to make our communities safer, is the way to counter that narrative. And as I said, Bill de Blasio and Eric Garcetti, I've both heard them talk about this in really fantastic, really well-framed ways.
But even speaking this way, when it comes to Muslim immigrants or Muslims in general, you're encountering additional roadblocks, additional mental roadblocks in people. So maybe Zara and Alex, in the Muslim advocacy, what strategies do you have for local groups to steer the conversation that way? We talk about the pragmatism value, but there are additional issues when it comes to Muslim immigrants. 2/3 of the Muslims in the U.S. are foreign-born right now. That has doubled over the past 20 years. What do you suggest for Zara and Alex?
I think that, I really appreciate Marissa's point. It's something that we debate a lot in the Muslim community is, do I condemn terrorism? Do I say what I'm not, right? Like, do I repeat the false frame in an attempt to combat it? And the reality is, people then remember the association, Muslim terrorist, Muslim shooting, Muslim crime, and we don't want to be doing that. And so what we urge people to do, of course, is data and stories, but to think about coming at it from the place of who we are, not who we are not. And I would say that this applies to targeted communities, but also those who want to stand with us. So it's not that we're standing with Muslims because they are not terrorists. We are standing with Muslims because Oakland values require that we celebrate diversity. Oakland recognizes that we are stronger when we protect everyone's civil rights. Oakland stands for the freedom to move and to feel safe in our own communities.
Give us a little example of that, just anything that off the top of your head. How do you make that connection work?
So in that example just right now, right? So for example, in Oakland, we're not passing civil rights protections because we don't think Muslims are terrorists. We are passing civil rights protections because we feel all Oaklanders should feel free and safe in their cities.
But as we know, a lot of Americans don't even know a Muslim, and yet they harbor these deep-seated thoughts about them, and they're buoyed, by think tanks pushing bad data, as we spoke about earlier, radio pundits. Uh, you've engaged with a lot of people on this topic. Give us some tips on what we write or what we say, what strategies you have to sort of win that argument.
Well, I mean, my main strategy is just to point out using the language of, so I work at the Cato Institute. It's a libertarian think tank. I use the language, I speak on the same terms as the people I talk to. They trust me on a lot of other issues, from tax policy to gun policy to spending and welfare, and I use the sort of same tactics that they talk about these other things and talk about immigration, why immigration is good for everybody, it's good for us, and I talk about it in terms that they would talk about in terms of those other issues, and on the same playing field as they do on those other issues. Because I'm mainly trying to convince people who are, conservatives or Republicans or libertarians in that way. So I think just speaking their language about these issues and the way they talk about them, I've had, I think, more success. I mean, one of the best things that ever happened to me was when I was speaking to a group in Pittsburgh. I was invited by a Republican club to debate somebody who was a Republican on this issue. I was pro-immigration, he was opposed, and it was great because a bunch of people who I think agree with me on policy protested my use of the term illegal immigrant or illegal immigration, and they got thrown out of the event, and that signaled to the audience in there that was mostly conservative that, hey, I was basically one of them. So putting myself in their shoes and saying that I agree with you about these concerns, but these concerns don't really exist here, I've had more success with that than I have with many other tactics.
And Marissa, you might find some fault with that strategy, but I assume that some of these strategies apply to the particular audience you're dealing with. I mean, what Zara also pointed out suggests what you wrote in the chat box, which is not using this rights argument, but that moral argument, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I talked about that a lot in the last webinar. So something that our research found was that when you frame particularly undocumented immigrants as having rights in this country, it not only sends conservatives, people who are anti-immigration back on their heels, it can even send allies back on their heels, because they think, well, within the immigration system, do these people have a right to be here? So it's not that you should never talk about rights, it's that you need to start by talking about the fact that as Americans, we value and respect the dignity of all people. And we have a system right now where some people are not allowed to adjust their legal status and therefore are living in very precarious circumstances, many of whom have been here for a very long time. And as Americans, it's not the right thing to do to, go arrest people at the hospital and deport them when their child's about to have surgery. So that's what you talk about first. You can get into rights eventually, but don't use rights as the frame.
And I'm curious as to how the police chief, as not only leader of a police department, but as also a community leader for so long, whereas Oakland and Chelsea, Massachusetts probably are unique situations. I know that you've heard stories and you must have encountered challenges over the years in addressing these immigrant issues. Not just what to do, how did you go about doing it? How did you overcome those challenges? What have you heard from other places, Medford, Everett, across the country, in terms of getting people on board with this message? How did you go about doing it? What are the strategies you employ?
Yeah, I mean, no, great question. I mean, it's a lot of hard work. It's difficult sometimes for me as a police chief or other officers of this police department to go out into different venues and give talks and speeches. We really need the leadership of our entire city, and oftentimes that's many of our immigrant leaders to buy in, and they do. It works out that if I'm one to say certain things and to basically promote inclusion and so forth, for those words that come out of my mouth addressing a group of people is one thing, but when I have these immigrant leaders in our city and that stand up and look across the room and say, you can absolutely positively trust the Chelsea Police Department, that means everything. When I have the clergy in our city do the same, that means everything. Everything at the end of the day, and I heard it mentioned during the webinar already, is trust. We have to have the residents trust the police department. We have to have the residents, in terms of trust, report crimes. The cycle of victimization is only going to continue just again and again and again. Certain people that prey on people that are immigrants, believing that these individuals will not call the police. It's out of control. So the fact is, these individuals that trust the police, they go and they reach out to their neighbors, their family members, and say you can absolutely trust the Chelsea police and other Metro Boston area police departments. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. We've come leaps and bounds. And I think not just here in Chelsea, I think in Boston, I think in Lawrence, I think in Lowell, all the larger departments in the state have really come a long way in building this trust together in our state.
And before I get some questions from our attendees, Zara, in the CARE network, I'm sure you've had multiple experiences of not getting the buy-in that you need in order to implement some more sensible policies, in order to implement some programs. And I heard Dearborn, Michigan apparently has implemented Sharia law. Like, crazy things are happening in terms of what people believe and what they want to move forward with. When you can't get that buy-in, whether it's from a principal or an administrator or a police chief or a mayor or a city council, what have you found to be successful?
I would say community advocacy has been the most successful and necessary tool. What that means, though, is an investment in relationships with impacted people. So making a distinction that I'm a full-time advocate. I am not, thinking, for example, about a Muslim ban context. I am not Somali. I am not Yemeni. So let me go find a resident of with impacted people, and then allies to keep pressure up, to think about different ways to advocate. So if the police chief is supportive, great, that makes it really straightforward. If the police chief is not, how many people can we turn out to city council meetings over and over again? And I'll give you, an interesting example for us in California, and particularly in the Bay Area, has been sheriff's offices, right? So police chiefs are at least accountable to city councils and mayors. Sheriff's offices are independently elected. And so a conversation has been, well, what do you do if you have an uncooperative sheriff, despite many like cooperative police chiefs in the area? You can, continue to protest him, but you've got to run people for office. And so there's short term, place pressure, continue to place pressure, involve stakeholders, involve impacted people, and then do it over and over again. But I think there's also long-term questions about developing a pipeline of people who have shared values, running for office, running for these positions, so that we can then have people like our police chief today saying, we are not going to cooperate with ICE in this city, right? That takes longer term investment in many places.
Right. And we'll take a few questions from our attendees who have provided some really, really good questions. And one of them, I think it's directed to perhaps all of you, which is, someone who is hoping to be an elected official soon. November's election month. Any ideas on engaging community members other than local officers and law enforcement on issues where they don't feel that it's related to their lives? Marissa, you spoke about the moral argument, and Zara, you touched on that quite a lot about how everyone is impacted by this, and maybe the police chief can chime in.
Well, I just know, like, what we see here in Chelsea, it's unbelievable as far as all the different events. We have a 4-story building here that I'm sitting in right now, and we have a park across the street. And we just sat around as a group recently. We said, something, we want to engage more people on different levels. We have an ice cream truck, which is kind of unique. It was a great idea that we stole from the city of Boston. But we have an ice cream truck that we rolled out this summer. We have our offices that we call it Copsicle One. We bought it for like next to nothing. It was ready for the ice cream truck graveyard, but we refurbished the whole thing. It's great. The kids love it. Their parents love it. They come up, they interact with the offices, the park across the street. We decided to have a movie night. We had probably about 300 people come out and showed Willy Wonka. The offices are there just engaging with the kids, young offices, not so young offices, some older offices. It's great. It's all about community outreach, community engagement. We're all one, the police of the community, and the community is the police, and we work together really, really great together. And as I said earlier, it's all about building that trust. If, God forbid, when someone is victimized, and unfortunately we had someone killed the other night, shot and killed, and we need these relationships for people to come forward and help us identify those responsible so they're not preyed on over and over again.
Marissa?
So I read that question as well, and I would say, using values when you make your arguments are really useful, and specifically, obviously, it depends on the topic. So specifically for immigration, I think the way to get people to kind of buy in is to start with that moral argument and talk about respecting the dignity of all people. And that's a fundamentally American value, that we respect everybody's well-being and the dignity of their lives. And you can also talk about the fact that we are a nation of immigrants. And again, other than Native Americans, all of us are descended from people who have migrated to this country. So, and then when talking about sort of when you get that pushback, pivoting to that value of pragmatism, and that as Americans we can make things work, but we need to do so collectively in order to make them work. So that would be my advice for getting sort of more buy-in in the community.
And so much of the debate now takes place on social media, and it's a totally different platform than that we did not have 10, 15 years ago. It changes the nature of the kind of conversations we have and how they're informed. So I don't know if you have any quick tips, Alex, Zara, or Marissa, I don't know if you've done research specific to social media, on how you get into that conversation and win the argument, or at least inform the argument better on social media.
I'll jump in. I'll give one quick example. I mean, I'm pretty big on Twitter, and rumors can really, a lot of negativity can result with rumors in a city, and certainly there's been a lot of talk of ICE sweeps lately around the country. And when rumors, especially when it gets to the radio, and the radio starts throwing things out there that there was a raid or in a given location, I'm quick to jump on Twitter, and if and set the facts straight, set the record straight, and my tweets specific to this issue will get retweeted and retweeted and retweeted because people want to hear it from an official source. If I just sat back and did nothing, and people would just basically stay in their homes and not send their kids to school and perhaps not go out shopping, go to the hospitals and so forth. So I think it's important to have that social media presence and really just kind of set the record straight at times when you need to.
So I would
had a lot of.
Sorry.
You can go ahead, Marissa. You go first.
Oh, sorry. So I would just quickly say that you can absolutely frame a tweet so that Jamie Oliver, one that I showed you, that was a picture that showed data. If they had framed that as this is about the food industry, people would have understood it better. You can also badly frame your tweet by retweeting a lie. So don't tweet out Donald Trump. Don't ever retweet him. You can refute him without actually sharing what he said.
I've had some success with tweeting out simple graphics that seem to dispel common myths. So people have this idea that the immigration system, it's very easy to get through. It's basically open like it used to be. That's not true. I frequently tweet out a simple graphic that shows how complicated the legal immigration system is with a legal map. It's more complicated than almost anything else that people deal with legally in their lives. And I'll say, this is why people have such a problem with the legal immigration system. It's a mess. And just doing that has a huge impact on people's lives, I think, or at least their opinion on this. Because if you think the immigration system is open and easy to navigate, and then you have all these unlawful immigrants, the question is, well, why, what's going on? But if you say it's really, really tough, here's why it's tough, here's a picture of how tough it is, people sort of go, oh, I didn't know it was so tough. I didn't know it was so hard. So I like doing it that way. And one comparison I've had is with success is comparing it to the income tax system. I mean, everybody knows how complicated taxes are, and saying, hey, immigration is pretty much as complicated as that is, and there's a lot of problems with it, and just that seems to do a lot of work on its own.
And just the final questions now. You point to something very important, Alex, and it's something that we're noticing over and over. Yet, we're all talking to ourselves, and we all have a sense of what the immigration system is like, but so many people don't know. So many people have no clue. And we spoke about that, Marissa, earlier on, that the majority of Americans, and hell, even a lot of immigrants, don't fully understand the gamut of the immigration system and how difficult it is. Not to mention the kind of values and the kind of characters and resilience of the immigrants and refugees who come here. And as I often say, these are the kinds of people America really, really wants and needs. Um, Perhaps Zara and Chief Kais, how do you all communicate that? Just some of the very, very basic things that people misunderstand about immigrants and the immigration system.
I would say getting people to share their stories is really important, right? I know even for me as a daughter of immigrants, it's been incredible. Like I'm at a loss for words anytime I'm in the presence of a refugee telling us what it took for them to get to the United States, how many countries they had to get through, how long it took, and who couldn't make it and is still left behind. And so I'm an advocate for storytelling in I think because that reaches people in a way that nothing else, not the arguments, not the data can, is really just the like, oh, you're my age and you lived through that 10 years in a refugee camp, and then I find out what that was like from the six banned countries and other refugees who've spoken out following the Muslim bans.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great approach. I do a lot of the same. You get to know a lot of the people that you hear their stories coming from Central America, crossing the border into Texas, out to California, then all the way across to the east of the United States, and you hear what they went through. And these are young kids, oftentimes, young girls in 12, 13, 14 years old, and some really tragic stories. And yet they're resilient. They come to this country. They get educated. They get jobs, and they're productive members of our city, our state, our country. So I think that's a great approach. I agree. Just telling those stories and trying to dispel all the rhetoric and the negative perceptions, and I think that goes a long way.
An ultimate question goes to Alex. Why are they not prone to criminality? Why are they like that?
I think it takes a special kind of person to choose to leave their home country, to go to a different place with a different culture, to in many ways separate from their families, their friends, everything that's familiar, and to go to a place largely for economic reasons to seek new opportunity. I think those types of people tend to think more about the future. They tend to think more about the economic opportunities available to them. In the case of my grandparents, I think about the lack of opportunities they had in their home country or the lack of rights. In the case of my grandma coming here from Iran. And there is a very much a sense of we need to make the best of this opportunity so they don't mess around. People like myself who are born here, I don't really know anywhere else in the world, right? America is normal to me. If they, I didn't grow up in a country where my parents had an income that is 90% below mine. So I think they appreciate that. They understand the opportunity, and the types of people who choose to come are those who are thinking about these things, who are more interested in taking these risks and trying to succeed. And a lot of those folks who aren't into that just aren't that interested in immigrating for the most part. And I think we lose sight of that as Americans and as the descendants of immigrants, that we come from people who made those same choices a long time ago, to either cross the Atlantic or to cross another ocean for the same purposes, and just how much guts that really takes to go to another place and learn another culture, language, and a culture. And those people, I think, are more interested in just not running afoul of the law, not screwing up their lives if they can help it.
And the immigration system is almost built that way. You have a violent infraction, you're eligible for deportation. But it's the healthy immigrant thesis that immigrants self-select for those who want to work, who have that ambition not only for themselves but also for their children. It's not an uncommon story. It is really an immigrant story. And if America is a nation of immigrants, it's the American story. So last question, I want each of you to give us just in 10 seconds, what would you recommend to our attendees? What can they walk away with that they can implement or do right now to help change the conversation on immigration? Alex, we'll start with you.
My number one is to tell people how complicated the system actually is.
These guys.
Yeah, I think it's a very complicated issue. I think just dispelling all the rumors, pushing back on the rhetoric, and expressing the positive stories.
And I'd probably add to that, just never be just a passerby. Always take ownership of what is happening around you
Mhm.
and get the facts out there and get people straight.
Absolutely.
Zara?
I would invite people to visit. I just dropped the link in the chat box, nomuslimbanever.com. It's the national campaign to oppose any and all attempts at the Muslim ban. It includes CARE, our partners at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, and the National Immigration Law Center. Organizations and leaders can endorse the campaign, can find local events where people are coming together to oppose the Muslim ban, and can get resources to host their own events.
Let's not forget it's the third iteration of the travel ban, but it's still a Muslim ban. The majority of the countries on the list are Muslim. And Marissa, Dr. Pinot, what's the top strategy you're going to recommend for us right now?
Well, it's going to be something that you shouldn't do, which is please don't ever myth bust. Do not repeat lies. Do not repeat misinformation if you can ever avoid it. It's not only it's not a neutral thing to do. It's actually counterproductive, and it's rife in this field. And it's hard to watch it happen over and over on social media. So no, just say no to myth busting.